The Arizona Territory, 1847. When homesteader Jacob Morrison stumbles upon Aiyana, a fierce Apache maiden, bathing in a hidden mountain stream, he thinks his biggest problem will be avoiding her father's wrath. He's wrong. According to Apache law, any man who sees an unmarried woman unclothed must either marry her immediately or face death at the hands of her warrior brothers. Jacob has two choices: flee and spend his life running from the most skilled trackers in the Southwest, or marry a woman who would rather see him scalped than share his bed. Aiyana is equally trapped. Her honor demands justice, but her heart rebels against binding herself to the enemy who destroyed her people's way of life. As her three brothers sharpen their knives and prepare for the hunt, both Jacob and Aiyana must decide what they're willing to sacrifice for survival. But can two people from warring worlds ever find common ground when everything they've been taught says the other should be destroyed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jacob Morrison's hands trembled as he backed away from the crystal-clear stream, his eyes fixed on the furious young woman who stood waist-deep in the water. Her long black hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her dark eyes burned with a rage that seemed to set the very air ablaze around her. "You will not move another step, white man," Aiyana commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Her fingers clutched a turquoise necklace at her throat, an intricate piece of Apache craftsmanship that seemed to glow against her bronze skin. The necklace had been her grandmother's, passed down through generations of strong Apache women, and it represented everything sacred about her heritage. Jacob stumbled backward, his boots slipping on the smooth river stones. "Ma'am, I didn't mean. I was just looking for water for my horse. I'll leave right now and forget this ever happened." "Forget?" Aiyana's laugh was sharp as a blade. "You think you can simply forget what your eyes have seen? You think our laws are as weak as your white man's promises?" She moved through the water with fluid grace, never taking her eyes off Jacob. Behind a large boulder, she retrieved her buckskin dress and slipped it over her head with practiced efficiency. When she emerged fully clothed, Jacob could see she was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 20 summers, but there was an ancient wisdom in her bearing that made her seem ageless. "Listen carefully, because your life depends on understanding," Aiyana said, stepping closer. "I am Aiyana of the Chiricahua Apache. You have seen what no man outside my family has the right to see. By our law, you have violated my honor and the honor of my clan." Jacob's throat felt dry as desert sand. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means you have two choices, and two choices only." She held up one finger. "You can marry me according to Apache custom, taking me as your wife and accepting the responsibilities that come with that bond. And the second choice?" Aiyana's smile was predatory. "You can run. You can try to escape to whatever hole you crawled out of. But know this, my three brothers will hunt you. They will track you across desert and mountain, through storm and sun, until they find you. And when they do, they will kill you slowly, so that your death serves as a warning to other white men who think Apache women are theirs for the taking." Jacob's mind raced. He'd heard stories about Apache trackers, tales that seemed too incredible to believe. Men who could follow a trail days old, who could track a man across solid rock, who never gave up once they started hunting. "Your brothers," he said slowly. "How do I know they'll even care about this?" Aiyana's hand went to her turquoise necklace, and her expression softened for just a moment. "Takoda is the eldest, a war chief who has never lost a battle, a who can track a shadow across the moon. Inape has killed 12 men in single combat and wears their scalps on his war belt. They raised me after our parents died fighting your people. My honor is their honor." "There has to be another way," Jacob insisted. "Some kind of payment, or there is no payment that can restore what you have taken." Aiyana cut him off. "Your people understand only money and land. We understand honor and family. You have seen my body, which was meant only for my husband's eyes. In your world, perhaps this means nothing. In mine, it means everything. Jacob looked around the hidden canyon, with its red rock walls and the secret pool, where Aiyana had been performing what he now realized was some kind of sacred ritual. The place felt ancient, untouched by the advancing tide of civilization that had brought him west. "How long do I have to decide?" "The sun will set in 4 hours," Aiyana replied. "By then, my absence will be noticed. My brothers will come looking for me, and they will find your tracks. If you are still here when they arrive, they will assume you have chosen marriage. If you have fled, they will assume you have chosen death. And if I choose marriage, then you will learn what it means to be bound to an Apache woman. You will live by our laws, honor our customs, and protect our people. You will father children who will be raised as Apache, not as white settlers." Jacob stared at this fierce young woman who held his fate in her hands. Everything about his carefully planned future, his homestead, his dream of building a ranch, his hope of bringing civilization to the frontier, hung in the balance. 4 hours, he repeated. 4 hours, Aiyana confirmed. "Choose wisely, Jacob Morrison. Some choices cannot be undone." Jacob's hand instinctively went to his shirt pocket, where his father's brass compass rested against his chest. The worn instrument had guided 3 generations of Morrison men westward, from the Virginia mountains to the Ohio Valley, and finally to this untamed Arizona territory. It represented everything he'd worked toward, the ordered, civilized world he was trying to build in the wilderness. Now that same compass seemed to mock him with its steady pointing north, toward safety, toward escape, toward a life on the run. "You're thinking about running," Aiyana observed, watching his face with unsettling perceptiveness. "Can you blame me?" Jacob pulled out the compass, its brass surface warm from his body heat. "I came west to build something permanent. A ranch, maybe a family someday. Not to get hunted down like some common criminal. What you call criminal, we call justice." Aiyana settled onto a flat boulder, her movements graceful, despite the tension crackling between them. "Tell me about these brothers of yours. How good are they really at tracking?" Aiyana's expression grew distant, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of legend. Dakota earned his war name when he was 16, leading a raid that freed 30 Apache children from a Mexican slave camp. He thinks 3 moves ahead of his enemies and has never been outmaneuvered in battle. She picked up a handful of pebbles from the stream bank, arranging them in a pattern Jacob didn't recognize. A Hoti can track a deer through a thunderstorm. He once followed a cavalry patrol for 6 days across bare rock and never lost their trail. The soldiers thought they were being hunted by spirits because they never saw him, only found his signs when he wanted them to. And the third, Inapi, her voice grew harder. He counts coup by taking scalps. 12 men have tried to kill him in single combat. 12 scalps hang from his war belt. He doesn't think he just kills, and he's very good at it. Jacob studied the compass in his palm. True north seemed like a cruel joke now. "How far could I get before they found my trail?" "You're riding a steel-shod horse across rocky ground. You smell like soap and leather and fear. To a Hote, you might as well be ringing a church bell." Aiyana stood and moved to where Jacob's bay gelding waited patiently. "This animal is well fed, well cared for. It will leave clear tracks, and when it tires you'll be forced to rest. Apache ponies are bred for endurance, not comfort. So running is suicide. Running is hope without wisdom." She returned to face him. "But staying requires courage you may not possess." Jacob looked back toward his homestead, though it lay miles away beyond the canyon walls. He'd spent 2 years building that place, clearing land, constructing a cabin, planning where the barn would go, and how he'd divert water for irrigation. It represented everything his father had taught him about perseverance and the American dream. "What kind of life would we have?" he asked. "If I chose marriage, I mean. You obviously hate me and everything I represent." "Hate is a strong word." Aiyana considered this carefully. "I hate what your people have done to mine. I hate the treaties that were broken before the ink dried. I hate the way you look at our land and see only property to be claimed. But not me personally. You, Jacob Morrison, are simply a man who made a terrible mistake at the worst possible time." Her tone softened slightly. "Whether I hate you personally remains to be seen." The afternoon sun was climbing higher, and Jacob could feel time slipping away like water through his fingers. Every minute of indecision brought him closer to a choice that would define the rest of his life, however long that might be. "If I marry you, what happens to my homestead? That would depend on you. Apache wives don't abandon their husbands to live alone. You'd come with me, live in a white man's house. I'd live where my husband lives, though I'd expect certain accommodations for my customs." Jacob tried to imagine this fierce young woman in his rove cabin, cooking at his stone fireplace, sleeping in his narrow bed. The image seemed impossible, like trying to cage a wild hawk. "How do I know your brothers would accept such a marriage? How do I know they wouldn't just kill me anyway? Because Apache law is Apache law. If you marry me according to our customs, you become family. Family is sacred, even if you were once an enemy." Jacob closed the compass with a sharp click. The sound seemed to echo off the canyon walls like a gunshot. 4 hours, you said. 3 hours and 20 minutes now. And if I'm still here when they arrive, then you'd better be prepared to convince 3 Apache warriors that you're worthy of their sister. The clay pot sat in the center of the lodge like an accusation. Its surface was painted with symbols that spoke of war and vengeance. Red for blood, black for death, white for the spirits that would guide their hunt. Dakota dipped 2 fingers into the thick pigment and drew a careful line beneath each eye. "She has been gone too long," Apache said, his voice tight with concern. The middle brother knelt beside his weapons, checking each arrow point with methodical precision. "Aiyana never misses the evening meal without word." Apache paced like a caged mountain cat, his scalp collection swaying from his belt with each step. "Something has happened to her. I can feel it in my bones." Dakota, eldest and wisest of the 3, continued his war paint ritual with deliberate calm. "Anger serves nothing until we know what we face." "Apache, when did you last see her tracks?" "At midday. She took the trail toward the sacred springs." Apache's scarred hands moved with practiced efficiency as he selected his best arrows. The tracks were clear then. She was alone, unhurried. The sacred springs. Dakota's jaw tightened. Those pools were where Apache women performed purification rituals, where they went to commune with the spirits of their grandmothers. It was a place of power and vulnerability, hidden from the eyes of men. Apache stopped pacing and grabbed his war club, its stone head worn smooth by use. "If some white dog has violated our sister," if Dakota cut him off sharply, "we deal in facts, not speculation." But even as he spoke the words, Dakota felt the cold certainty settling in his gut. Aiyana was too careful to simply disappear. And these days white settlers grew bolder, pushing deeper into Apache territory with each passing season. The war paint felt heavy on his skin, each stroke a promise of violence to come. Red for the blood they would spill, black for the death they would deliver, white for the ancestors who would guide their weapons true. "Gather your gear," Dakota commanded. "We leave now." Apache, bring the tracking kit. Apache, take the war ponies, the ones that can run all night without rest. The 3 brothers moved with the coordinated efficiency of men who had hunted together since childhood. Each knew his role, his strengths, his purpose in the deadly dance they were about to begin. Apache slung his bow across his shoulder and checked the contents of his tracking bag: dried meat, water bladder, fire steel, and the collection of subtle tools that made him the finest tracker in the territory. He could read sign that other men couldn't even see, could follow a trail across bare rock by noticing the tiny scratches left by horseshoe nails. Apache selected his weapons with the loving care of an artist choosing brushes. War club for close work, knife for silence, lance for the final strike, and his favorite scalping blade, its edge so sharp it could part hair with a whisper. "If harm has come to Aiyana," Apache growled, testing his knife's edge against his thumb, "I will take the offender's scalp while he still breathes." You will take nothing until I give the word, Jacob replied firmly. Aiyana is not just our sister, she is the daughter of a war chief. Her honor affects the entire clan. This must be handled according to law, not passion. The eldest brother stood and surveyed his weapons. His war lance bore eagle feathers from birds he had killed with his own hands. His shield carried the markings of every battle he had fought, every enemy he had defeated. At 35, he had never lost a fight, never retreated from an enemy, never failed to protect what was his. What if she's already dead? Apache asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. All three brothers knew that white men sometimes took Apache women for sport, discarding them like broken tools when they were finished. Jacob's hand tightened on his lance shaft. Then we will paint ourselves for mourning after we have painted our enemies with their own blood. They emerged from the lodge as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The war ponies stamped and snorted, sensing the tension that radiated from their riders. These were not the gentle horses of white men, bred for appearance and comfort. These were Apache war horses, small, hardy, capable of covering impossible distances across terrain that would kill cavalry mounts. Aiyana knows the old laws, Jacob said as they prepared to mount. If she lives, she will try to guide us to her. And if she doesn't live, Inapi's voice was deadly quiet, then we will teach these white invaders why Apache justice is swift and final. The three warriors mounted their ponies and rode toward the sacred springs, their war paint gleaming in the fading light. Behind them the clay pot sat empty in the lodge, its pigments now worn on the faces of men who would not rest until their sister was found and honor was restored. The decision came suddenly, like a rattlesnake strike. One moment Jacob was agonizing over his impossible choices. The next he was looking into Aiyana's dark eyes and hearing himself say, "I'll stay. You're certain?" Aiyana's voice betrayed nothing. But Jacob caught a flicker of something, surprise perhaps in her expression. "No," he admitted, "but running feels like cowardice, and I've never been a coward." They had barely an hour of daylight left when they heard the distant sound of hoofbeats on stone. Aiyana's head snapped up like a deer scenting wolves. "They come faster than I expected," she murmured, then looked at Jacob with new urgency. "Follow me." Quickly, she led him up a narrow trail that wound between towering red rocks, their horses picking their way carefully over loose green. Jacob's bay gelding struggled with the steep climb, but Aiyana's paint pony moved with sure-footed grace. "Where are we going?" Jacob called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Somewhere we can talk before they find us. You need to understand what you've chosen." They reached a narrow ledge, hidden behind a screen of juniper trees. From here they could see the sacred pool below and the three trails that led to it. Aiyana swung down from her pony and immediately began gathering items from a leather pouch at her waist. Jacob watched, fascinated, as she spread out what looked like a collection of small bundles wrapped in soft deerskin. Her medicine bundle. He'd heard of such things, but never seen one. Each packet contained herbs, stones, or other items that held spiritual significance. "What are you doing?" "Preparing." She unwrapped a bundle of sage and began crushing the silver-green leaves between her palms. "If we're to be married, it must be done properly. The spirits must witness our union, or it will have no power to protect you." "Protect me from what?" "From Apache." Aiyana's hands worked with practiced efficiency, mixing the sage with what looked like cornmeal and small pieces of turquoise. "Jacob will listen to reason. Apache will follow Jacob's lead. But Apache, he has killed men for lesser offenses than yours." Jacob felt his throat go dry. "What exactly did I get myself into?" "A chance to live, if you're smart about it." She paused in her preparations to look at him seriously. "Jacob, when my brothers arrive, you must not show fear. Apache men respect courage above all else. If they sense weakness, even Jacob won't be able to control Apache." The sound of hoofbeats grew closer. Jacob could now make out individual horses, three of them moving with the controlled urgency of experienced hunters. "Tell me about this marriage ceremony," Jacob said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "In your world, I think you speak words before a holy man and exchange rings." Aiyana held up a small clay pot filled with a mixture that smelled of sage and something else, something earthy and ancient. "In our world, marriage is a binding of spirits. We will drink from the same cup, share the same breath, let our blood mingle on sacred ground. Blood, a small cut on each palm, pressed together." She demonstrated with her own hands. "It creates a bond that cannot be broken by words or distance. Once made, we will be truly married in the eyes of the spirits and the tribe." Jacob stared at her hands, long-fingered, graceful, marked with small scars that spoke of a life lived close to the edge of survival. Soon those hands might be joined with his, in a way that would change everything about his carefully planned future. "Are you afraid?" he asked. Aiyana considered the question with characteristic honesty. "Yes. Not of the marriage itself, but of what comes after. You don't know our ways. I don't know yours. We'll be strangers bound together by necessity rather than choice. Maybe we could change that. Maybe." She looked at him with those penetrating dark eyes. "Or maybe we'll spend the rest of our lives as prisoners of each other's worlds." The hoofbeats stopped. Voices carried up from the canyon floor. Harsh, urgent Apache words that Jacob couldn't understand, but whose meaning was clear enough. They had found Aiyana's trail. "They're here," Aiyana whispered, gathering her medicine bundle. "Whatever happens next, remember, show no fear. Meet their eyes, speak truth, and trust that Apache law is stronger than Apache anger. Even Inape's anger. We're about to find out." She began the careful descent back toward the sacred pool, moving with the silent grace of someone raised in these mountains. Jacob followed, each step taking him closer to true Apache warriors who would decide whether he lived or died. Jacob's worn leather Bible felt heavy in his hands as he and Aiyana waited by the sacred pool. The book had belonged to his father and grandfather before him, its pages soft with age and marked with careful annotations in fading ink. He'd carried it west as a source of comfort and guidance, never imagining it would become a symbol of the vast gulf between his world and hers. "What is that?" Aiyana asked, noticing how his fingers traced the gold lettering on the cover. "The holy book of my people," Jacob replied. "It contains the teachings of our God, the stories of our faith. You believe in only one God." "Yes, the creator of all things, who sent his son to save mankind from sin." Aiyana's brow furrowed. "This is strange to me. We believe the Great Spirit flows through all things. The rocks, the trees, the animals. How can one God control everything?" The sound of approaching horses grew louder, but Jacob found himself drawn into this unexpected theological discussion. "Our God is all-powerful, all-knowing. He made the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. Made it from what? From nothing. His word alone." Aiyana shook her head slowly. "Our creation stories tell of Grandmother Spider, weaving the world from her own thoughts, of Coyote teaching the people to live in harmony with all creatures. Your God sounds lonely, making a world by himself." Jacob had never thought of it that way. He's not lonely. He has angels, and he watches over all his children. But he lives apart from the world he made. He's everywhere, but also in heaven, which is... Jacob paused, realizing how difficult it was to explain concepts he'd never questioned. "It's a perfect place, free from pain and suffering. A place where nothing dies." "Yes, then nothing can live either," Aiyana said matter-of-factly. "Death and life are part of the same circle. How can you have one without the other?" The hoofbeats stopped just beyond the screen of cottonwoods that surrounded the pool. Jacob heard the soft sounds of men dismounting, the whisper of weapons being readied. "Your brothers," he whispered. "Yes." Aiyana's hand went to her medicine bundle. "Jacob, will your God protect you here, in this sacred place of my people?" It was a question that cut to the heart of everything he'd been taught about faith and salvation. I believe God is everywhere. Then perhaps our spirits can find common ground, even if our peoples cannot." 3 figures emerged from the trees, moving with the fluid grace of predators. Jacob's first thought was that the stories hadn't exaggerated their presence. These weren't just men, they were forces of nature given human form. JACOB led them, tall and broad-shouldered, his war paint making his face appear carved from living rock. His eyes found Jacob immediately and held them with an intensity that felt like being stared down by a hawk. Apache flanked him to the right, smaller but compact, his attention constantly shifting as he read the signs around the pool: footprints, disturbed vegetation, the story written in earth and stone. Apache completed the triangle, and Jacob felt his blood chill. The youngest brother's face was a mask of barely controlled rage, his hand resting on the grip of his war club, as if it took all his willpower not to charge. "Sister," JACOB said in Apache, his voice carrying across the water. Aiyana rose gracefully and replied in the same language, her tone respectful but firm. The exchange continued for several minutes, growing more heated with each response. Jacob caught his own name mentioned several times, and from Apache's increasingly aggressive posture, the discussion wasn't going well. Finally, JACOB held up a hand for silence. "You will speak English now," he commanded, his accent thick but his words clear. "This white man should understand what is decided about his fate." Jacob stood slowly, clutching his Bible. "I understand you have cause to be angry." "Angry?" Apache spat, switching to heavily accented English. "You violate our sister's honor and speak of anger." "I speak of blood payment." "White dog." Apache. JACOB's voice was sharp, with warning. "You will hear what they have to say." Jacob opened his Bible, finding strength in its familiar weight. "I made a terrible mistake. I didn't know this was a sacred place, didn't know your customs, but I'm prepared to make it right." "How?" JACOB asked. "By marrying your sister, if she'll have me. By accepting the responsibilities that come with being part of your family." Apache laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think you can become Apache by speaking words?" "I think honor matters as much to my people as it does to yours," Jacob replied, meeting Apache's glare, "and I think running away like a coward would dishonor us both." The water gourd passed between them like a peace pipe, its carved surface worn smooth by countless hands. Made from a hollow desert gourd and decorated with traditional Apache symbols, it had taken on new meaning in the tense negotiation that followed the brothers' arrival. When JACOB offered it first to Jacob, then to Aiyana, the simple act of sharing water became a symbol of tentative acceptance. "Drink," JACOB commanded, watching Jacob carefully. "In the desert, water is life. Those who share water share trust." Jacob tilted the gourd to his lips, tasting the sweet, clean water from the sacred spring. The liquid was cool and somehow seemed to carry the essence of this ancient place. He passed it to Aiyana, who drank deeply before handing it to her eldest brother. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold. Apache paced restlessly at the edge of the pool, his frustration evident in every movement. Apache crouched by the water's edge, studying tracks that told him the story of what had happened here. "The white man's tracks show he approached from the south trail," Apache reported, in English, apparently for Jacob's benefit. "He came here seeking water for his horse, not hunting for women." "Does his intent matter?" Apache growled. "He has seen what he should not see. Intent always matters." JACOB replied firmly, "The difference between accident and assault is the difference between justice and vengeance." Jacob felt sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cooling evening air. What would this marriage mean exactly? What would be expected of me? Aiyana translated the question into Apache for her brothers, then replied in English. "You would become part of our clan. You would learn our ways, follow our laws, protect our people as we would protect you. And my homestead, my plans to build a ranch." JACOB considered this carefully. "Apache husbands provide for their families. If your land can feed and shelter Aiyana, then it serves our people. But I'd have to give up my own customs, my faith? Did we ask you to abandon your God book?" JACOB gestured toward the Bible still clutched in Jacob's hands. "Apache way is not about taking, is about adding." Apache stopped pacing and faced Jacob directly. You speak of marriage like buying cattle. Marriage is sacred bond. You ready to bleed for my sister? Ready to die for her? Jacob looked at Aiyana, who watched him with those penetrating dark eyes. I don't know her well enough to love her yet, but I respect her, and I'm willing to learn what love means in your world. Honest answer, Dakota acknowledged with a slight nod. Love comes from sharing hardship, not pretty words. Apache rose from his examination of the tracks and approached the group. Sister, why did you not try to escape when you discovered this white man watching you? Aiyana's hands moved to the water gourd, turning it slowly as she considered her answer. Because I saw something in his eyes, not hunger, like some men have. Not conquest, just surprise and shame. Shame means nothing if not backed by action, Apache declared. Which is why we're here, Jacob said, finding his voice again. I could have run. Your sister could have let me go, but we both chose to face the consequences of what happened. Dakota stood and walked to the edge of the sacred pool, where the last rays of sunlight touched the water. In the old days, this choice would be simple. White man sees Apache woman naked. White man dies. But these are not the old days. They should be, Apache muttered. Should be, and are not the same thing. Dakota turned back to face the group. Our people need allies, not more enemies. If this white man proves worthy, if he truly accepts our ways, then perhaps both tribes benefit. Jacob felt a glimmer of hope. What would I need to do to prove myself worthy? Survive the wedding ceremony, Apache said with what might have been humor. Wedding ceremony? Aiyana lifted the water gourd again, holding it like a chalice. Apache marriage is not words spoken in front of witnesses. It is a joining of spirits, a sharing of life force. You drink from the sacred waters, you let your blood mingle with mine, you accept the responsibility of protecting not just me but my entire clan, and if I fail in that responsibility, then Enapi gets his wish, Dakota said simply. The youngest brother smiled, showing white teeth in his painted face. I can be patient when death is guaranteed. Jacob looked around at the 4 Apache people who held his fate in their hands. The dying light made their faces seem carved from the same red stone as the canyon walls. Everything about his old life, his plans, his dreams, his careful vision of the future, seemed impossibly distant now. When would this ceremony take place? Now, Aiyana said, rising to her feet. Before the moon rises, Apache marriages happen at the moment between day and night, when the world stands balanced, between light and darkness. Now, Jacob's voice cracked slightly. Unless you've changed your mind about running, Apache said hopefully. Jacob stood slowly, the water gourd passing between them one final time, as the last light faded from the canyon walls. Aiyana's weaving kit spread across the flat stone like a collection of forgotten dreams. The tools, bone needles, plant fiber threads dyed in earth tones, and half-finished baskets in various stages of completion represented the domestic life she was about to leave behind. In Apache culture, these implements marked her as a woman of skill and patience, qualities essential for survival in the harsh desert landscape. As twilight deepened around the sacred pool, she worked with quick, practiced movements to create something new, not a basket or blanket, but ceremonial cords that would bind her and Jacob together during the marriage ritual. What are you making? Jacob asked, settling beside her on the stone. The 3 brothers had withdrawn to a respectful distance, giving the couple time to speak privately before the ceremony began. Wedding bonds, Aiyana replied, her fingers never pausing in their work. Among my people, marriage is not just words. It requires physical symbols, things that can be touched and seen. Jacob watched her hands move with mesmerizing precision. The fibers seemed to obey her will, twisting together into cords stronger than their individual strands. You learned this from your mother? My grandmother. After my parents died fighting Mexican slavers, she raised me alongside my brothers. Aiyana's voice carried old grief, carefully contained. She said a woman's hands must be skilled at creating life as well as preserving it. Creating life, baskets to gather food, clothing to keep the family warm, shelter materials, medicine preparations. She gestured to her weaving kit. These tools feed people, heal them, protect them from the elements. Jacob studied the intricate patterns emerging under her fingers. I never thought of weaving as survival. Your people buy what they need from stores and trading posts. We make what we need or we do without. Aiyana selected a different colored thread, deep blue dyed from desert berries. This is why Apache women must learn many skills. We cannot depend on others for necessities. What other skills do you have? I can track game, set snares, find water in the desert. I know which plants heal and which ones kill. I can deliver babies, tend wounds, prepare bodies for burial. She paused in her weaving to look at him directly. I can also fight when necessary. My brothers taught me to use knife and bow. Jacob felt his preconceptions shifting again. You're not just a weaver. Apache women are never just anything. We are whatever our families need us to be. The realization struck him that he was about to marry someone far more capable and complex than any woman he'd known in the civilized world. The ladies back east were trained in music and literature, skills that seemed suddenly frivolous compared to Aiyana's practical knowledge. What do you know about me? He asked. Really know, I mean. Aiyana continued weaving, considering his question. You're a man who came west alone, which means you're either running from something or searching for something. Your hands are soft, but show recent calluses, so you've been learning hard work. Your clothes are well made but not fancy. You have money but don't waste it. Anything else? You carry a God book everywhere, which means faith matters to you, but you also carry a compass, which means you trust in practical things, as well as spiritual ones. She smiled slightly. You water your horse before yourself, which means you understand responsibility. Jacob was amazed by how much she'd observed in their brief time together. You learned all that just from watching me? Apache's survival depends on reading people quickly, knowing who can be trusted, who might be dangerous, who is lying or telling truth. And what do you think about me? Aiyana's hands paused in their weaving. I think you're afraid, but trying not to show it. I think you're honest, which is rare in any man, white or Apache. And I think you're about to make a commitment you don't fully understand. Or you, making a commitment I don't understand? Yes, she resumed her weaving, the blue thread creating a pattern that seemed to represent flowing water. But understanding can come later. Sometimes you must act first and learn wisdom afterward. The marriage cords were nearly complete now. Two separate strands that would soon be braided together into an unbreakable bond. Aiyana held them up to catch the last rays of sunlight filtering through the canyon. Jacob, she said softly, once we do this, there is no undoing it. Apache marriages are not like white marriages. There is no divorce, no separation. We will be bound until death. Until death, Jacob repeated, the words feeling heavy on his tongue. Are you certain this is what you want? Jacob looked around at the sacred pool, at the three brothers preparing ritual items by firelight, at this remarkable woman who could weave baskets and track game with equal skill. His old life seemed impossibly far away. I'm certain it's what I choose, he said finally. Want and choose aren't always the same thing. Aiyana nodded approvingly. Now you begin to think like Apache. The storm struck with the sudden ferocity that only the Arizona high country could unleash. One moment the evening sky showed clear stars. The next it erupted in lightning and thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Jacob and Aiyana barely had time to gather their belongings before Takoda was shouting over the wind, pointing toward a dark opening in the canyon wall. Cave, the war chief called out. Quickly, before the flash flood comes. They scrambled up the rocky slope as the first heavy drops began to fall. Within minutes, those drops became a deluge that turned the peaceful stream into a raging torrent. By the time they reached the cave entrance, all five of them were soaked to the skin. The cave was larger than it appeared from outside, its walls stretching back into darkness. But what made Jacob catch his breath were the paintings that covered every surface, ancient images in red, yellow and black pigments that seemed to come alive in the flickering light of Aharafa's hastily lit torch. "What is this place?" Jacob whispered, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Sacred cave," Aiyana replied, wringing water from her long hair. "Very old, from the time before time." The paintings told stories in a visual language that transcended words. Jacob could make out human figures hunting massive animals that no longer roamed these lands. Warriors with spears faced creatures that looked like giant bears and cats, with teeth like curved knives. Women gathered plants under a sun that seemed larger and more vivid than the one he knew. "My ancestors painted these," Jacob said, setting down his weapons reverently. "Their grandfathers' grandfathers, when the world was young and full of powerful spirits." Apache had grown unusually quiet, his earlier aggression replaced by something approaching awe. "We are not worthy to shelter here," he murmured in Apache. "The storm brought us here," Aiyana replied in the same language. "The spirits provided shelter. We should be grateful, not ashamed." Outside, the thunder rolled across the canyon like the voices of angry gods. Lightning illuminated the cave entrance in stark white flashes, and the sound of rushing water grew louder as the flash flood built to its peak. Jacob found himself drawn to one particular section of painting. The images here seemed to tell the story of a great ceremony, figures dancing around fires, hands raised toward a star-filled sky, couples joined together by what looked like cords or ropes. "Wedding ceremonies," Aiyana said, following his gaze. "The old ways painted so they would not be forgotten. How old are these? Older than memory, older than the grandfathers of grandfathers." She moved closer to the paintings, her fingers hovering just above the ancient pigment. "Some say they were painted when the first Apache learned to love." The intimacy of the cave, the ancient artwork surrounding them, and the storm raging outside created an atmosphere unlike anything Jacob had ever experienced. Here, surrounded by the artistic legacy of Aiyana's people, he began to understand that he wasn't just marrying a woman. He was joining a tradition that stretched back countless generations. "The wedding," he said suddenly. "Can we still do it?" "Here." Jacob looked around the cave, his expression thoughtful. "This place is sacred to all Apache, perhaps more sacred than the pool below. The ancestors would witness," Apache added, gesturing toward the painted figures. "Their spirits still live in these images." Aiyana studied Jacob's face in the torchlight. "You would want to be married in a cave, surrounded by ancient ghosts." "I would want to be married in a place that means something to your people," Jacob replied. "These paintings, they're beautiful, they're eternal. They show that love and commitment have always mattered to the Apache." A particularly loud crash of thunder seemed to punctuate his words. In the echoing silence that followed, Jacob could hear the steady drip of water from the cave entrance and the distant roar of the flood outside. "The storm will pass," Jacob said finally. "But storms also bring change. Perhaps this one brings good change." Apache, who had been studying a section of paintings that depicted warriors in battle, turned to face the group. "If we do this thing, if we perform the ceremony here, it will be binding in ways you cannot imagine. White man, these spirits do not forgive broken promises." "I don't intend to break any promises," Jacob said. "Intentions and actions are not the same," Apache replied. "But perhaps that is something you will learn." Outside, the storm continued its assault on the canyon, but inside the cave, surrounded by the artistic testimony of countless generations, something profound was taking shape. The ancient paintings seemed to watch over them like benevolent guardians, their eternal presence a reminder that some things, love, commitment, the bonds between people, transcended time itself. "When the storm passes," Aiyana said quietly, "we will begin." The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and cool with the scent of wet sage. As they prepared to leave the sacred cave, Jacob's hand went instinctively to his shirt pocket, where a thin gold band lay hidden, a secret he'd carried for 3 years like a splinter in his heart. The ring had belonged to Sarah Elizabeth, his fiancée back in Ohio. She died of consumption just 2 weeks before their planned wedding, leaving Jacob with nothing but memories and a piece of jewelry that had become both blessing and curse. He'd carried it west, not from sentiment, but from inability to let go of the past. Now, as he watched Aiyana gathering her weaving materials in preparation for their wedding ceremony, the ring felt heavier than ever. "You're troubled," Aiyana observed, her perceptive eyes missing nothing, just thinking about what comes next. She studied his face in the early morning light filtering through the cave entrance. "There's something you haven't told me, something that weighs on your spirit." Jacob hesitated. Apache marriages were supposed to join two people with no reservations, no hidden burdens. But how could he explain that part of his heart still belonged to a dead woman? "I was engaged before," he said finally. "Back in Ohio. She died before we could marry." Aiyana's expression softened. "What was her name?" "Sarah Elizabeth. Sarah Beth. I called her." Jacob pulled out the ring, its gold surface catching the light. "I've been carrying this ever since. Couldn't bring myself to leave it behind, but couldn't bear to look at it either." The ring was simple but elegant, a thin band with a small diamond that had taken Jacob 6 months' wages to afford. It represented everything he'd once believed about love, that it was gentle, predictable, built on shared faith and common backgrounds. "Tell me about her," Aiyana said, settling beside him on the cave floor. "She was perfect, I suppose. Beautiful, well-educated, from a good family. She played piano, spoke French, could recite poetry for hours." Jacob turned the ring over in his palm. "Everyone said we were ideally suited, but what? She was everything a man could want in a wife." "That's not what I asked." Aiyana's voice was gentle but insistent. "I asked about her, not about what she represented to other people." Jacob found himself really thinking about Sarah Beth for the first time in years, not the idealized memory he'd constructed, but the real woman she'd been. She was fragile, he admitted, delicate, like a flower that needed constant tending. She feared thunderstorms, couldn't bear the sight of blood, fainted at loud noises. "I spent most of our courtship protecting her from anything that might upset her." "Did you love her?" The question struck him like a physical blow. "Of course I loved her. I was going to marry her." "Those aren't the same thing." Jacob stared at the ring, his reflection distorted in its polished surface. "I thought they were. Back then, I thought love was about finding someone who fit into the life you'd planned. And now I'm about to marry a woman who can track game, heal wounds, and probably kill a man with her bare hands if necessary." He looked at Aiyana with something approaching wonder. "A woman who challenges everything I thought I knew about strength and beauty." Aiyana took the ring from his palm, examining it carefully. "This Sarah Beth, she would not have survived out here. No, she wouldn't have wanted to try, but you brought her memory into the wilderness anyway. I brought her ring. I thought it would help me remember what love was supposed to feel like." "And what was it supposed to feel like?" Jacob considered this. "Safe, comfortable, like everything was in its proper place. And how does love feel now?" He looked at Aiyana, this fierce, complicated woman, who had turned his world upside down in the space of a single day. Terrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing if there's solid ground below. Aiyana held the ring up to the morning light, where it cast tiny rainbows on the cave wall. "Jacob, you cannot marry me while part of your heart belongs to a ghost. I know. What will you do?" Jacob took the ring back, feeling its familiar weight one last time. Then, before he could change his mind, he stood and walked to the cave entrance. The flash flood had carved new channels in the canyon floor, and a strong stream still flowed toward the distant desert. Sarah Beth deserved better than being carried around like a burden, he said. "She deserved to be remembered for who she was, not who I needed her to be." With a motion that felt both like ending and beginning, Jacob threw the ring into the rushing water. It disappeared instantly, swept away toward whatever future the desert held. When he turned back to Aiyana, she was watching him with those dark, penetrating eyes. "Now," she said simply, "you're ready to be married." Aiyana's fingers moved over the string of traditional marriage beads like a rosary, each carved turquoise and silver ornament, representing a different aspect of Apache matrimony. Her grandmother had given them to her on her 16th birthday, along with the solemn words, "When the right man comes, you'll know because your heart will choose him, even when your mind says no." Now, sitting outside the sacred cave as the morning sun painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and amber, those words seemed prophetic. "Second thoughts?" Jacob asked, settling beside her on the sun-warmed stone. All. Aiyana held up the marriage beads so the light caught their polished surfaces. "Among my people, marriage is not something entered into lightly. These beads have been blessed by 4 generations of medicine women. They carry the prayers of my ancestors." Jacob studied the intricate carvings on each bead, symbols he was beginning to recognize as representations of the natural world. Eagles for freedom, bears for strength, spirals for the eternal cycle of life and death. "Tell me what each one means." Aiyana smiled, appreciating his genuine interest. "This one is for fertility, the hope that our union will bring children to carry on both bloodlines." She moved to the next bead. "This represents harmony between husband and wife, the balance that keeps a marriage strong through hardship. And this larger one in the center, protection. The promise that we will guard each other's lives as fiercely as we guard our own." Her voice grew serious. "Jacob, once these beads are placed around our joined hands during the ceremony, we become more than husband and wife. We become guardians of each other's souls." The weight of that responsibility settled over him like a heavy blanket. "What if I fail? What if I can't protect you the way an Apache husband should? Then you'll learn, or we'll both die trying." Her matter-of-fact tone might have seemed callous to someone who didn't understand Apache pragmatism. "Marriage isn't about perfection, Jacob. It's about commitment that survives imperfection." Takoda emerged from the cave, carrying a bundle wrapped in deerskin. His war paint from the previous day had been washed away, replaced by different markings, ceremonial designs that marked him as a spiritual leader rather than a warrior. "The sun reaches the proper angle," he announced. "If we're to do this, now is the time." Aiyana stood, the marriage beads still clutched in her hands. "Are you ready?" Jacob looked around at the assembled group. Ahoti and Inape had also painted their faces with ceremonial designs, transforming them from hunters into witnesses. Even their earlier hostility seemed to have given way to the solemnity of the moment. "What exactly will happen during the ceremony? We'll drink from the sacred pool," Aiyana explained. "Share breath by breathing into each other's lungs. Let our blood mingle on consecrated ground. And these beads will be placed around our wrists to bind us together in the eyes of the spirits." It sounds intense. Apache ceremonies are always intense. We don't believe in doing important things half. Jacob thought about the simple wedding ceremony he'd planned with Sarah Beth, a brief service in the town church, followed by a reception with cake and dancing. Everything proper, predictable, safe. This would be none of those things. "Jacob," Takoda called out, "you must understand. Once this ceremony begins, there is no stopping. Apache marriages cannot be undone by white man's law or Apache custom. Only death breaks the bond." "Only death," Jacob repeated, the words feeling both ominous and oddly comforting. Aiyana took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "In your world, marriage is often about property, inheritance, social position. In ours, it's about survival. 2 people becoming stronger together than they could ever be apart. And you think we can be stronger together? I think we're about to find out." She lifted the marriage beads, letting them catch the morning light one last time before the ceremony began. "But yes, I believe we can be. You have courage, even if you don't always trust it. And I have knowledge of how to live in this harsh land." Jacob squeezed her hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of a life lived close to the edge of survival. "What about love? Can that grow from necessity?" "My grandmother used to say that love planted in necessity grows the deepest roots," Aiyana replied. "Like desert plants that send their roots down to find water. The harder the conditions, the stronger the foundation." Inape approached, carrying a clay bowl filled with water from the sacred spring. "If you're both ready," he said, his earlier hostility replaced by formal dignity, "we should begin before the spirits grow impatient." Aiyana looked at Jacob's eyes, searching for any last hesitation. "Once we drink from that bowl together, we'll be bound forever. Are you certain this is your choice?" Jacob thought about his father's compass, pointing always toward true north, about Sarah Beth's ring, now flowing somewhere downstream toward the desert, about the life he'd planned and the life that was about to begin. "I'm certain," he said, and meant it. Dakota's war lance stood upright in the rocky ground like a sentinel, its eagle feathers stirring in the morning breeze. The weapon was more than mere tool of war. It was a symbol of traditional Apache justice, painted with the history of every battle the eldest brother had fought, every enemy he had defeated in defense of his people. The wedding ceremony had concluded at dawn, binding Jacob and Aiyana together with sacred vows that could only be broken by death. But now, as they prepared to leave the canyon and begin their new life together, Apache had discovered something that changed everything. "Riders," the tracker announced grimly, pointing toward dust clouds rising in the distance. 6 men, maybe 7, moving fast toward the homestead. Jacob shielded his eyes against the morning sun, trying to make out details across the miles of broken terrain. "Could be travelers passing through." "No," Apache said with certainty. "They ride in formation, like soldiers, and they know where they're going." Inape's hand went instinctively to his war club. "Cavalry?" "Worse," Dakota said, studying the distant riders with the practiced eye of a war chief. "Bounty hunters, kind who get paid for Apache scalps." Jacob felt his blood chill. "How can you tell from this distance? The way they move, the spacing of their formation. These are men who hunt people for money." Dakota pulled his war lance from the ground, testing its balance with familiar ease. "They must have tracked us from the sacred pool." Aiyana moved closer to Jacob, her hand finding his arm. "This is what I feared. Our marriage makes you a target now. Anyone who rides with Apache becomes Apache in the eyes of men like these." "We have to get to the homestead," Jacob said urgently. "If they reach it first, they'll destroy everything I've built." "Let them," Inati said bluntly. "We can find other places to live." "No." Jacob's voice carried a determination that surprised everyone, including himself. "That land represents 3 years of my life. It's where Aiyana and I will build our future together. I won't let bounty hunters take it from us." Dakota studied his new brother-in-law with something approaching respect. "You would fight for a piece of ground. I would fight for my home. Our home now." The war chief nodded slowly. "Then we fight together. But understand, these men will show no mercy. They see Apache as animals to be hunted, not people to be reasoned with." Apache was already moving, checking his weapons with swift efficiency. 7 men against 5, not impossible odds, but not good ones either. 5. Jacob looked around at the group. "You're Apache now," Aiyana said simply. "That makes you a warrior by necessity, if not by training." Jacob had never killed a man, had never even fired a shot in anger. His rifle was used for hunting game, his pistol for protection against wild animals. The thought of turning those weapons against other human beings made his stomach clench. But the thought of armed men destroying his homestead, threatening his new wife, drove away his hesitation. "What's the plan?" Dakota planted his war lance again and gathered the group around it. "Apache, you take the high trail. Get ahead of them, find a position where you can use your bow. Inape, circle around from the south. Hit them from the side when the fighting starts." "And us?" Aiyana asked. "We make our stand at the homestead. Let them come to us on ground we choose." Dakota's painted face was grim with determination. "Jacob, you know this land better than any of us. Where can we make them pay the highest price for attacking?" Jacob closed his eyes, visualizing his property from the perspective of defensive warfare. "There's a small rise behind the cabin. Good cover among the rocks. Clear fields of fire in 3 directions. Water? A spring-fed well covered by the cabin's overhang. Good. They'll have to expose themselves to reach us." Inape hefted his war club, testing its weight. "How many of them do you think we can kill?" All of them, Dakota said without hesitation. Apache law is clear. Those who threaten the family must die. Jacob looked at his new wife, this remarkable woman who had gone from stranger to partner in the space of a single day. Are you afraid? Terrified, Aiyana admitted. But fear and courage aren't opposites. They're companions. One makes the other meaningful. The distant dust clouds were growing larger, which meant the riders were moving fast. Whatever was going to happen would happen soon. One more thing, Dakota said, lifting his war lance and offering it to Jacob. Among Apache, a man proves his worth not with words, but with actions. Today you'll prove whether you're truly worthy of my sister. Jacob took the lance, feeling its weight, its perfect balance. The eagle feathers tied near the point fluttered in the wind like prayers made visible. I won't let you down. Don't make promises, Dakota replied. Just fight like your life depends on it. Because it does. The blood-stained bandana, wrapped around Jacob's arm, told a story of violence and choice that neither he nor Aiyana would ever forget. What had started as his simple neckerchief was now soaked crimson from the bullet wound he'd taken during their desperate fight against the bounty hunter. They had reached the homestead just minutes before their pursuers, barely enough time to take defensive positions before the shooting started. The battle had been brief, but brutal. 7 armed men against Jacob and the 3 Apache brothers, with Aiyana fighting alongside them with deadly efficiency. Now, as the sun climbed toward noon, and the bodies of their enemies lay scattered in the yard, Aiyana worked with steady hands to clean and bind Jacob's wound. The bandana, once a simple piece of cloth, had become a symbol of their shared struggle and mutual dependence. Hold still, Aiyana commanded, her fingers gentle but firm as she examined the bullet graze along Jacob's upper arm. You're fortunate. Another inch to the right and it would have shattered bone. Doesn't feel fortunate. Jacob gritted through clenched teeth as she cleaned the wound with whiskey from his cabin. The alcohol burned like liquid fire, but he forced himself not to flinch. Pain means you're alive, she replied pragmatically. Dead men feel nothing. Around them, the aftermath of battle painted a grim picture. Apache moved among the fallen bounty hunters, checking each body with professional thoroughness. Apache retrieved his arrows, cleaning blood from the points with practiced efficiency. Dakota stood guard, watching the horizons for signs of more trouble. 7 men, Jacob said, still struggling to process what had happened. We killed 7 men. 7 men who came here to kill us, Aiyana corrected, wrapping the bandana tightly around his arm. 7 men who saw Apache and thought only of scalp money. The leader of the bounty hunters had been a man named Crawford, according to papers found in his saddlebags. He'd carried a wanted poster offering $50 for each Apache scalp, no questions asked about age or gender. The poster had made Jacob sick to his stomach. How do you live with it? He asked quietly. Taking human life? Aiyana paused in her ministrations, considering his question with the seriousness it deserved. By remembering that they made the choice to hunt, we simply made the choice to survive. But they were still men. They had families, dreams, reasons for being here. Yes, she agreed, and they chose to pursue those dreams by murdering innocent people. That was their decision, not ours. Jacob looked around at his homestead, the cabin he'd built with his own hands, the well he'd dug through solid rock, the cleared fields where he'd planned to plant crops. Everything looked the same, but felt different now. The land had been baptized in blood, marked by violence that would forever change its meaning. What happens now, he asked. Now we bury the dead and move forward. Aiyana finished tying the bandana and sat back to examine her work. The wound should heal cleanly if you keep it clean and don't strain the arm. Dakota approached, his war lance still dark with blood from the fight. Brother, he said, using the Apache word that Jacob was beginning to understand meant family. You fought well for a man with no training. I fought like a man with everything to lose, Jacob replied. That's the only way worth fighting. The war chief studied Jacob's face, searching for something. You took 2 men with rifle shots. I couldn't have made. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Hunting. Putting food on the table requires accuracy. Putting food on the table is one thing. Putting bullets in moving targets who are shooting back is another. Dakota nodded approvingly. You have the instincts of a warrior, even if you lack the training. Apache joined them, wiping his hands on a scrap of cloth. The horses are good quality, well fed, well cared for. These men had money behind them, which means there will be others, Apache added grimly. Word will spread that Apache are living here. More bounty hunters will come. Jacob felt the weight of that reality settling over him like a heavy blanket. His dream of a peaceful ranch life seemed impossibly naive now, so we're constantly looking over our shoulders. Until the territory becomes safe for Apache, Aiyana said, which may be never. Or until we make it safe, Dakota corrected. Apache don't run from problems, we solve them. Jacob touched the blood-stained bandana on his arm, feeling its rough texture against his skin. The simple piece of cloth had become something more, a reminder of the choice he'd made to stand and fight rather than flee, to protect what was his rather than abandon it to predators. Then we solve this one, he said quietly. Together. Aiyana smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since their hasty wedding ceremony. Now you're thinking like my husband. The makeshift barricade they'd constructed around the homestead stood like a monument to desperation and determination, built from overturned wagons, stacked logs and stone from the creek bed. It represented their united decision to make their stand here, rather than flee into the wilderness. Every piece of the fortification had been placed with purpose, creating interlocking fields of fire that would force any attackers to pay dearly for every foot of ground. 3 days had passed since the bounty hunter attack, and scouts reported more armed men gathering in the territorial capital. The word was spreading that Apache lived on Jacob's land, and the $50 bounty on Apache scalps was drawing hunters from across the territory like vultures to carrion. Jacob stood atop the highest section of their defensive wall, surveying the approaches to his homestead. The morning sun cast long shadows across the fields he'd planned to plant with corn and wheat. Now those same fields served as killing grounds, cleared of cover to deny attackers any concealment. Regrets? Aiyana asked, climbing up beside him on the barricade. Her movements were fluid despite the weapons she carried, a rifle across her back, a knife at her belt and a pouch of additional ammunition that marked her as a warrior rather than a traditional Apache wife. About marrying you? No. Jacob adjusted his grip on Dakota's war lance, which had become his constant companion. About thinking I could build a peaceful life out here, daily. Peace was always an illusion, she replied matter-of-factly. Apache children learned that lesson early. Safety comes from strength, not from hoping others will leave you alone. Below them, the 3 brothers worked with methodical efficiency to strengthen their defenses. Dakota supervised the construction of firing positions that would allow them to cover multiple angles simultaneously. Apache prepared supplies, water, ammunition, medical supplies for what might become a siege. Apache sharpened weapons and checked sight lines, his earlier bloodlust now channeled into tactical planning. How many do you think will come? Jacob asked. As many as the bounty will draw. Aiyana pointed toward the distant hills, where dust clouds had been spotted the previous afternoon. $50 is 6 months' wages for some men. They'll keep coming until the cost becomes too high. Or until we're all dead. That's one possibility. Her tone was remarkably calm for someone discussing her own potential death. But not the most likely one. Jacob looked at her with surprise. You think we can win? I think we can make winning so expensive that eventually they'll find easier target. Aiyana gestured toward their fortifications. This isn't just about fighting, Jacob. It's about sending a message that Apache land is not free for the taking. The defensive barrier stretched in a rough circle around the cabin, barn and well. They'd spent 2 days moving everything of value inside the perimeter and clearing everything that could provide cover to attackers. The result was a miniature fortress that could hold off a considerable force if they had enough ammunition and the will to use it. Riders coming, Otu called from his lookout post. Single man, riding slow with a white flag. Jacob squinted across the fields and spotted a lone horseman approaching under a flag of truce. The man rode with the confident posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed, Probably a territorial official or military officer. What do you think he wants? Jacob asked. To convince us to surrender, Dakota replied, joining them on the barricade. They always try talking before they try shooting. Makes them feel civilized. The rider stopped just outside rifle range and dismounted. He was a middle-aged man in a dusty suit, carrying himself with the authority of someone who wielded considerable power in territorial politics. "You in there," he called out. "I'm Judge Morrison from the territorial court. I want a parley." Jacob felt his blood freeze. "Morrison, that's my family name. Coincidence?" Aiyana asked. "I don't know. Maybe." Jacob cupped his hands around his mouth. "What do you want, Judge?" "To talk, to see if we can resolve this without more bloodshed." Apache spat contemptuously. "White man's justice. They want to negotiate after we've proven we can fight. Let me hear what he has to say," Jacob decided. "Knowledge never hurt anyone." "Famous last words," Aiyana murmured, but she nodded agreement. Jacob climbed down from the barricade and walked to the gate they'd built into their defensive line. The judge approached cautiously, his hands visible and empty. "You Jacob Morrison?" the man asked. "I am." "Then we might be kin. I'm Samuel Morrison. Originally from Virginia before I came west to practice law." Jacob studied the older man's face, looking for family resemblance. "My grandfather was Thomas Morrison from Virginia. Thomas was my brother." Judge Morrison removed his hat, revealing gray hair and a weathered face marked by years of frontier living. "That makes us cousins, boy, and it makes this situation a damned sight more complicated than I expected." The revelation hit Jacob like a physical blow. The man offering to negotiate was family blood kin, who might be able to provide a way out of their desperate situation, or who might be the most dangerous enemy they'd yet faced. The council fire burned bright in the center of the homestead's courtyard, its flames casting dancing shadows on the faces gathered around it. Aiyana had insisted on building it according to Apache tradition, a sacred circle where disputes could be settled through words rather than weapons. The fire itself had become an artifact of negotiation, its ancient symbolism, bridging the gap between two very different concepts of justice. Judge Samuel Morrison sat across from Jacob, while Dakota, Ahota, and Apache formed a semicircle representing Apache interests. Aiyana positioned herself between the two groups, literally and figuratively, serving as translator for more than just language. "This is how your people settle disputes?" Judge Morrison asked, studying the ceremonial arrangement with curiosity rather than mockery. "Council fire has resolved conflicts for countless generations," Dakota replied in careful English. "Fire sees truth. Fire burns away lies." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "We have similar traditions in our courts, though they've become more formal over the years. The principle remains the same. Let all sides speak their truth." Jacob fed another piece of wood to the fire, watching sparks spiral upward into the star-filled sky. "What exactly are you proposing, cousin?" "Safe passage," Judge Morrison replied. "For you and your wife. Leave the territory, start fresh somewhere else, and this whole business gets forgotten. And the Apache," Jacob gestured toward the three brothers, "they go back to their people. No charges filed, no bounties collected, clean slate for everyone." Apache's hand moved toward his war club, but Dakota's sharp look stopped him. "And our sister?" the war chief asked quietly. "Your sister made her choice when she married a white man. That choice has consequences. The consequence is that she becomes white man's problem." Aiyana's voice carried a dangerous edge. Judge Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "I'm trying to find a solution that keeps everyone alive. Young lady, the territorial governor has authorized a militia company to deal with this situation. 50 armed men will be here within the week." "50 men," Ahota repeated thoughtfully. "Many will die before we fall." "And dying accomplishes what exactly?" the judge demanded. "You can't fight the entire territorial government. This isn't just about bounty hunters anymore. You've made this a political issue." Jacob stared into the council fire, its flames hypnotic in their constant motion. "What if we're not willing to leave? Then a lot of good people are going to die for no good reason." "No good reason?" Dakota's voice rose with controlled anger. We fight for the right to live where we choose, to marry whom we choose, to exist without fear of being hunted like animals. These are not good reasons. Judge Morrison rubbed his temples, looking like a man caught between impossible choices. In principle, you're absolutely right, but principles don't stop bullets, and they don't change the reality of territorial politics. Then change the politics. Aiyana said suddenly, "You're a judge. You have influence. Use it." "How?" "Declare this land sovereign, Apache territory. Married to a white man legally nullifies any bounties. Create a precedent that protects mixed marriages." The judge stared at her with something approaching admiration. "That's actually quite clever, but it would require territorial approval, possibly federal intervention. The legal complications alone would keep lawyers busy for years," Jacob finished. "And in the meantime, we'd have legal protection. Theoretical protection," Judge Morrison corrected. "Legal documents don't stop men with guns who think they're doing God's work by killing Apache." Anape spoke for the first time since the council began. "Then we kill them first, and prove to everyone that Apache are savage killers who can't be reasoned with." Aiyana turned to face her youngest brother. "Violence is sometimes necessary, but it should never be the first choice." "It was their first choice," Anape replied stubbornly, "which is why we must be better than them." Judge Morrison leaned forward, his face serious in the firelight. "There's something else you need to know. The bounty isn't just about Apache scalps anymore. Word is spreading that a white man has gone native, married into the tribe, taken up arms against other whites. Some people see that as treason." "Treason against what?" Jacob demanded. "Against civilization, against the natural order of things, against everything the territorial expansion is supposed to represent." Jacob felt the weight of that accusation settling over him like a burial shroud. In trying to honor Apache law and protect his new family, he'd apparently become a symbol of something larger and more dangerous than personal conflict. "So what you're really saying," he said slowly, "is that this isn't about bounty hunting anymore. It's about making an example." "I'm afraid so." Judge Morrison's voice carried genuine regret. "You've become a symbol, boy, and symbols are dangerous things to be in times of change." The council fire crackled and popped, sending new sparks into the dark around its sacred circle. 6 people from 2 very different worlds tried to find a path through an impossible situation. "How long do we have?" Dakota asked. 3 days, maybe 4. Then the militia arrives, and this becomes a military matter rather than a civil one. Jacob looked around the circle at the faces illuminated by firelight, his new family, his distant cousin, and the impossible choices that lay before them all. The ceremonial knife lay across Dakota's palms like a bridge between life and death, its obsidian blade reflecting the morning sun with mirror-like perfection. Carved from volcanic glass by master craftsmen generations ago, it was traditionally used in Apache honor duels, formal combat that resolved disputes too serious for council fires, but too personal for war. Judge Morrison had left the previous evening, taking their proposal for legal protection back to the territorial capital, but before the law could act, honor demanded satisfaction. 3 militiamen had arrived at dawn under a flag of truce, led by a captain who claimed Jacob had murdered his brother among the bounty hunters they'd killed. "This is madness," Aiyana said, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Jacob has no training in knife fighting. Captain Harrison will kill him, perhaps," Dakota acknowledged, offering the ceremonial blade to Jacob. "But Apache law is clear. When a man's honor is questioned, he may demand trial by combat. Harrison has accepted the challenge." Jacob took the knife, feeling its surprising lightness. The obsidian edge was sharp enough to split hairs, but against an experienced fighter, sharpness alone wouldn't be enough. "There has to be another way," Aiyana insisted. "Name it," Apache said bluntly. "The white captain says Jacob murdered his brother in cold blood. Jacob says it was self-defense. Words won't settle this." Captain Harrison stood 30 yards away, testing the balance of his own knife, military-issue steel with a 7-inch blade. He was a lean, hard-faced man in his 30s, moving with the confident grace of someone who'd fought and won many such contests. "I don't suppose you've ever killed a man with a blade?" Hoti asked quietly. "Never," Jacob admitted. "Rifles, yes. Knives, no. Different skills entirely." Dakota observed. "Rifle keeps death at distance. Knife makes you intimate with it." The dueling ground had been marked out in traditional Apache fashion, a circle 20 feet across, drawn in the dirt with cornmeal blessed by Aiyana, according to ancient custom. Once the combatants entered that circle, only death or surrender would end the fight. "Remember," Dakota instructed, "obsidian cuts deeper than steel but breaks more easily. One solid blow against his blade and yours may shatter." "Encouraging," Jacob muttered. "Truth serves better than encouragement in matters of life and death." Captain Harrison approached the circle's edge, his military bearing radiating confidence. "Last chance, Morrison. Admit you murdered my brother, submit to territorial justice, and this ends without bloodshed." "Your brother came here to collect bounties on Apache scalps," Jacob replied, loud enough for all the assembled witnesses to hear. "He chose to make war on innocent people. I chose to defend my family. Apache aren't family to white men. This one is family to me." Harrison's face twisted with disgust. "Then you'll die like the Apache lover you are." Both men stepped into the sacred circle simultaneously. The watching crowd, militiamen, Apache warriors, and Aiyana, fell silent as ancient ritual took precedence over modern conflict. The first exchange came quickly. Harrison lunged forward with military precision, his steel blade seeking Jacob's heart in a thrust that would have ended the fight instantly. Jacob twisted aside, feeling the wind of the blade's passage against his ribs, and slashed wildly with the ceremonial knife. Obsidian met flesh across Harrison's forearm, opening a line of red that drew first blood to Jacob. But the captain's counterstrike came immediately, his steel blade seeking Jacob's throat in a backhanded cut that barely missed. "You're too defensive," Anapi called out. "Apache knife fighting is attack. Always attack." Jacob circled left, trying to stay away from Harrison's strong side. The captain was clearly experienced, his movements economical and deadly. Every thrust and slash came with killing intent, no wasted motion or hesitation. "Your brother was a coward," Jacob said, hoping to provoke a mistake. "He shot at women and children." "My brother was a soldier following orders," Harrison snarled, launching a furious combination that drove Jacob back against the circle's edge. Steel rang against obsidian as Jacob parried desperately. The ceremonial knife held, but hairline cracks appeared along its edge. Another such impact would shatter the ancient blade entirely. "Fight like your wife is watching," Dakota called out. "Because she is." Jacob glanced quickly toward Aiyana, saw the fear and faith warring in her dark eyes. In that moment of distraction, Harrison's blade found its mark, opening a gash along Jacob's ribs that sent blood flowing down his side. "First blood to me," the captain grinned, sensing victory. "Your Apache magic isn't working, boy." But Jacob was learning. Apache warriors didn't fence like European gentlemen. They fought like predators, using speed and savagery to overwhelm opponents. As Harrison pressed his advantage, Jacob stopped retreating and exploded forward, the obsidian knife seeking the captain's heart in a thrust that carried all his desperation and love. The ceremonial blade found its mark, sliding between ribs with surgical precision. Harrison's eyes widened in shock as ancient volcanic glass pierced his heart, ending his life in a single, perfect thrust. Jacob stepped back as the captain fell, the ceremonial knife still clutched in his trembling hand. Around the sacred circle, silence stretched like a held breath. The blended wedding ceremony items lay arranged on a blanket between the homestead and the Apache camp, a collection of objects that told the story of two cultures learning to honor each other's traditions. Jacob's worn Bible sat beside Aiyana's medicine bundle. Christian wedding rings rested next to Apache marriage beads. A silver cross, shared space with eagle feathers, blessed by tribal elders. Word had spread quickly through the territory about the knife duel and its outcome. Judge Morrison had returned with unexpected news. The territorial governor, faced with a legal precedent that could affect future Indian relations, had chosen pragmatism over politics. Jacob and Aiyana's marriage would be officially recognized, creating a buffer zone around their homestead that both cultures could respect. "I never imagined my wedding would require territorial approval," Aiyana said, adjusting the white dress that Tekoda had somehow procured from the town of Socorro. It was simple cotton, not elaborate silk, but it represented something important: her willingness to embrace aspects of Jacob's culture just as he had embraced hers. "I never imagined my wedding would involve 3 separate ceremonies," Jacob replied, tugging at the collar of his best shirt. They'd already been married according to Apache law in the sacred cave. Today's ceremony would satisfy both Christian tradition and territorial legal requirements. The assembled crowd represented an unlikely gathering. Apache families had traveled from distant camps to witness this historic union. White settlers from neighboring homesteads had come out of curiosity, and in some cases grudging respect. Even a few of the militiamen who had come to arrest Jacob now served as honor guards for the ceremony. Father Miguel, an elderly Catholic priest from Socorro, stood ready to perform the Christian portion of the ceremony. Beside him, an Apache medicine man prepared to bless the union according to tribal custom. Judge Morrison would handle the legal formalities that would make their marriage binding under territorial law. 3 wedding ceremonies seems excessive, Apache observed, though his tone held more amusement than complaint. The youngest brother had been transformed by recent events, his anger tempered by pride in his sister's courage and his new brother-in-law's proven warrior skills. 3 ceremonies for 3 different worlds, Tekoda corrected. "Each one necessary to protect what we've built here." Apache had approached carrying a pair of horses, Jacob's bay gelding and one of the Apache war ponies. "Brother, sister, these are wedding gifts from the clan. May they carry you safely through whatever journeys lie ahead." The ceremony began with Apache tradition. The medicine man blessed the 4 directions, called upon the spirits of ancestors to witness the union, and wove smoke from burning sage around the couple. Aiyana and Jacob shared water from the sacred spring, their hands bound together with cords made from her grandmother's loom. Father Miguel stepped forward next, his Latin prayers mixing with the desert wind. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God, and these witnesses to join this man and woman in holy matrimony." His words carried across the assembled crowd, sanctifying their bond according to Christian tradition. The legal ceremony was briefest of all. Judge Morrison read the territorial statute recognizing their marriage, witnessed their signatures on official documents, and pronounced them husband and wife under the laws of the Arizona Territory. "By the power vested in me by the territorial government," he declared, "I now pronounce you legally married with all rights and protections thereof." But it was the moment when Jacob placed a simple gold band on Aiyana's finger that seemed to seal their union most completely. The ring, purchased from Socorro's only jewelry merchant, was nothing elaborate, but it represented his commitment to honoring her place in both his world and hers. "With this ring," he said softly, "I promise to protect you, provide for you and love you according to the customs of both our peoples." Aiyana's response came in Apache, then English. "With this heart, I promise to stand beside you, strengthen you, and love you until the spirits call us home." The celebration that followed blended traditions in ways that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. Apache drums mixed with a fiddle that one of the settlers had brought. Traditional venison and corn shared table space with beef stew and cornbread. Children from both cultures played together while their parents negotiated this new world they were all creating. As evening approached and the various guests began departing for their homes, Jacob and Aiyana found themselves alone for the first time as a truly married couple. The wedding items lay scattered around them, symbols of the complex journey that had brought them together. "Do you think it will work?" Aiyana asked, settling beside him on the porch steps. This mixing of worlds. Jacob looked out across the homestead, now protected by both territorial law and Apache honor. In the distance, smoke rose from cooking fires in the temporary Apache camp. Closer to the house, several white families lingered, clearly reluctant to return to their isolated homestead. "I think we've already made it work," he replied. "The question is whether we can keep it working." Together, Aiyana said, her hand finding his. "I believe we can face whatever comes." The wedding items glowed in the fading light. Christian and Apache symbols no longer separate, but part of a new tradition being born on the Arizona frontier. The shared home bore little resemblance to the simple bachelor cabin Jacob had built 3 years earlier. Adobe additions in the Apache style flanked the original log structure, creating a dwelling that honored both architectural traditions. Inside, Navajo blankets hung beside European paintings, while Apache pottery shared shelf space with his mother's china. The home itself had become an artifact of cultural synthesis, proving that two ways of life could not only coexist, but strengthen each other. 12 months had passed since their wedding, and the changing seasons had brought changes to the homestead that none of them could have anticipated. The defensive barricades were gone, replaced by productive gardens that fed both the Morrison family and the small Apache community that had grown up around them. Jacob sat on the expanded porch, watching the sun set over fields where corn and traditional Apache crops grew side by side. His hands, once soft with townsman's ease, now bore the permanent calluses of a man who worked the land with his own sweat and muscle. But more than his hands had changed, his perspective on survival, community, and the meaning of home had been transformed by his marriage to Aiyana. "The baby is finally sleeping," Aiyana announced, emerging from the house with the quiet grace that motherhood had added to her natural poise. At 7 months pregnant with their second child, she moved with the careful dignity of a woman carrying precious cargo. Their first child, a son they'd named Thomas after Jacob's grandfather, and given the Apache name Nalnish, meaning he works hard, had been born 6 months after their marriage. The boy's existence served as living proof that two bloodlines could blend successfully, creating something new without destroying what came before. "Takoda says the government inspector is pleased with our progress," Jacob reported, referring to the official who'd been documenting their experimental community for territorial records. "Apparently we're being held up as an example of successful Indian integration. Aiyana repeated with slight amusement. Such a formal word for simply learning to live together. The community that had evolved around their homestead defied easy categorized. 23 Apache families now lived in traditional wickiups, scattered across the valley, while 6 white families had built homes that incorporated native building techniques. Children from both cultures attended a school that Aiyana had established, learning to read and write in both English and Apache. "Mrs. Henderson brought her new baby by this afternoon," Aiyana continued, settling beside Jacob on the porch swing they'd built together. "She wanted our medicine woman to bless the child according to Apache custom. And you are blessed the child according to grandmother's teachings, then offered to teach Mrs. Henderson some of our infant care practices." Aiyana's hand rested on her rounded belly. "Survival wisdom belongs to everyone, regardless of where it originated." The success of their unusual community hadn't gone unnoticed beyond the territorial capital. Delegations had arrived from Washington, studying their methods for possible application to Indian reservations elsewhere. Academic papers had been written about the Morrison experiment, though Jacob found such formal attention slightly ridiculous for what seemed like simple common sense. "Do you ever miss the old life?" he asked, before all this complexity. Aiyana considered the question seriously. "I miss the simplicity of knowing exactly who was friend and who was enemy, but I don't miss the limitations that came with that certainty." Through the windows of their home, warm light illuminated rooms where Apache crafts and frontier necessities coexisted naturally. Jacob's father's compass sat on a shelf beside Aiyana's medicine bundle, both objects now serving as reminders of journeys completed rather than destinations sought. "Enape is talking about marriage," Aiyana mentioned with a smile. "There's a girl from the Mescalero band who visited last month. Apparently she was impressed by his war stories. Will he bring her here? If she'll have him." He's discovered that being part of a successful community makes him more attractive to potential wives. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the main trail. 3 riders emerged from the gathering dusk, a halt leading a couple Jacob didn't recognize. As they drew closer, he could see that the strangers were another mixed couple apparently seeking the sanctuary and acceptance their community had become known for providing. More refugees from the outside world, Aiyana observed. Is that what we are? A refuge? We're proof that different doesn't have to mean enemy, she replied. In a territory where such proof is desperately needed. As the riders approached the house, Jacob stood to greet them. The home behind him, part cabin, part adobe dwelling, entirely their own creation, stood as testimony to the possibility of building something new without destroying something old. Their son stirred in his cradle, making the small sounds that would soon demand attention. In a few months, a second child would join him, adding another thread to the complex tapestry they were weaving between 2 worlds. Welcome, Jacob called out to the approaching strangers, using the Apache word Aiyana had taught him. Welcome to our home. The shared home stood solid and welcoming in the gathering darkness, its windows glowing with the warm light of family and community. A beacon of hope in a land still learning that survival and civilization could mean many different things.